Good morning. I am Darren McGarvey. I am both a teacher and the International Baccalaureate Coordinator at Kettering Fairmont High School. On behalf of the administration, staff, and students, I'd like to welcome you to our school this morning for a conversation with author David Wood and others. As you entered the auditorium this morning, you were given two items. The first, a card and maybe a pencil to take notes on and possibly to write questions on for a Q&A we'll hold later. And the other was a yellow ribbon given you to a member of our Hope Squad, a peer-to-peer advocacy program and support group in remembrance of National Suicide Prevention Week. Before we get started this morning, I'd like to acknowledge some of our special guests. First, would you join me in a brief round of applause to show our appreciation for Sharon Rabb, founder of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and Stacy McDonald for making this morning possible. I think it's something also to acknowledge all the schools here today, that we're all here from all over the Dayton area. So we're gonna, of course, Kettering Fairmont High School's here. We have students from Chaminade Julienne, Stivers School for the Arts, Thurgood Marshall High School, Yellow Springs High School, Meadowdale High School, and the Dayton Early College Academy. There you go. Give yourself some applause. Students from many of those schools are members of JCAWA, the Junior Council on World Affairs, and many of our students at Fairmont are part of the International Baccalaureate Program. And of course, thank you to all the teachers who took time out to bring you here today. Come on, let's hear it for the teachers. I want to tell you a little bit about our program and our panel this morning. We're going to spend about an hour in conversation, having the group here talk amongst themselves, and then about the last half hour we'll spend in allowing you to ask questions. So Mrs. Richardson and I will be scanning the audience, Oprah Winfrey back in the day style with a microphone, and we'll allow you to ask some of the questions you might have. At the end of the program at 11, we will talk about dismissing you, and if you do have your book by David Wood, he will also be here to sign them as well. Miami Valley School. Did I skip you? I just missed you in the list, Susan. I'm so sorry. Miami Valley School, sorry. There's like 500 of you here. Sorry. Let me tell you a little bit about our panel this morning. Maybe you can give a little wave there when I call your name. First, Logan Young. Logan is currently a graduate student at Wright State University. She is also an Army combat veteran who served one combat tour in Kabul, Afghanistan from 2010 to 2011. She was the lead convoy driver of a MATV for her unit's personal security detail team. She's a Dayton native. Her husband, Joe, also an Army combat veteran, and her live in Dayton with their 3 boys. Next up, Jeremy Dobbins. Jeremy on the panel was born and raised in Springfield. He enlisted in the Marine Corps Infantry after high school and fought with Marja with Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 6 Marines. He's been married to his high school sweetheart for 11 years. They have 3 children together. He will graduate with a BS in mechanical engineering from Wright State University this spring. Next on our panel is Dave Berry. Dave was born and raised also in Springfield, Ohio. He is currently a master's student of public administration at Wright State University while working as a peer advisor for the Veteran and Military Center. He served the U.S. Army as a cavalry scout in the 173rd Airborne Combat Team 191 Cav Bulldog Troop from 2010 to 2014. David deployed to Afghanistan with the 173rd from 2012 to 2013. And finally on our panel is Erica Carter. She is a native Californian who selected to be in the Army. Choosing a path not frequented by women, she became an all-wheel vehicle diesel mechanic and recovery specialist. Because one can never do just one thing in the military, Erica was also a logistics specialist and a training NCO. Throughout her time in the Army, she was stationed at Fort Jackson Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Fort Hood twice, Korea, and had the privilege of participating in 2 tours totaling 23 months during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Let me tell you a little bit about our panelist, David Wood. He is a journalist. He is has reported on war and conflict around the world for 35 years. He's sitting there in the middle in the hot seat, we called it. He's a graduate of Temple University. David Wood was a correspondent for Time Magazine in Chicago, Boston, and Nairobi, where he covered guerrilla wars across Africa from 1977 to 1980. As a reporter in Washington, he has covered presidential campaigns in the State Department for the Washington Star and national security issues for the Los Angeles Times, Newhouse News Service, the Baltimore Sun, and AOL's Politics Daily before moving to Huffington Post in February 2011, where he has covered national security issues at the White House, Pentagon, CIA, and State Department, and has reported on conflict from Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Central America. He accompanied U.S. military units in the field many times, both on domestic and overseas training maneuvers and in Desert Storm, the Iran-Iraq tanker war, the interventions in Panama, Somalia, and Haiti, peacekeeping missions in the Balkans, and combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. In 5 trips to Afghanistan since January 2002, he has lived and worked with many divisions, including the 10th Mountain, 101st Airborne Divisions, 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, and the 82nd Airborne Division. In 1992 to 1993, he spent a year with the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, including 3 months of ground operations in Somalia. His accounts of that experience is in his book, A Sense of Values, published by Andrews and McNeil in 1994. Wood was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting in 2012. He was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 1998. In 2012, Wood was the recipient of an International Award for War Reporting. Wood won the General R. Ford Prize for Distinguished Defense Reporting, and in 2017, he was awarded the Dayton Literary Peace Prize Nonfiction Winner for this book, What Have We Done? Finally, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our moderator for this morning. Let me tell you a little about him. By the way, did I mention that Stivers is here? Stivers is here, and so is Miami Valley School. Here we go. Our moderator for this morning is Jonathan Reed Winkler. He is a professor and chair of the Department of History at Wright State University. A native of Ohio, he holds degrees from Ohio University's Honors Tutorial College and Yale University. And he has studied at Capital University, the University of Edinburgh, and the University of Salamanca. He is the author of Nexus, Strategic Communications and American Security in World War I by Harvard University Press, and he's the winner of the Paul Birdsall Prize of the American Historical Association in 2010, among others. He's delivered lectures before an American Philosophical Society and at the National Security Agency. He teaches, researches, and writes on the U.S. foreign relations, military and naval history, international history, and strategic thought in the modern era. I am done introducing our panel, and they will take over from here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for coming here this morning. I'm glad that many of you, if not all of you, have read the book. If you haven't read it, I'm sure that you'll be finishing it tonight, and there'll be a quiz. My job is really to serve as the on the stage moderator and to get out of the way as much as possible and let those who've lived the experiences talk about their experiences and the book. But let me provide a brief summary first in a few minutes here, and then we'll open up into questions and begin our discussion. You should also know that several of us have done this before, and so we may reach the point of making silly jokes at one another about asking the same questions before. So this is a very important and complicated book for those of you who have not necessarily a lot of life experiences to be able to engage it and to make true sense of just what this all has and what it is that we're discovering about what it means to be in combat, what it means to have gone through these experiences. And it's been 18 years since 9/11, 18 years since, for many of us, the world changed in many ways. Those of you who are below 18 won't really understand, and hopefully there's not something in your lives that has that same significance as it did for many of us. The book that we have here is a parallel exploration of individual stories of moral injury by veterans of the conflict since 9/11 and of the developing network of individuals attempting to make sense of this wound and to develop mechanisms for healing that wound. Through these stories and his own experiences, David sees that we have not done a proper job of acknowledging the true costs of war among our military in the current generation. He seeks an understanding of the origin of the moral injury and the disconnect between the rigid rules of the military, of war, and of combat crammed down into recruits, into new officers, and of the intense pressure of battle. It is in that disconnect between the prior to service moral and ethical codes, the new expanded codes that are given in training, and the realities of applying those codes in the muck of war that precipitates or exacerbates these injuries. This leads some to question their moral codes that they are given, and even to dismiss the supposed black and white nature of that code, And he concludes on page 99 that there is no true preparation for war, no emotional protection or spiritual armor that we currently give our men and women who wear the uniform. It is important then, in his view, that there be a more clearly articulated reason for going to war, so that there is purpose for those who participate. He explores the heavy weight of the actual process of killing as a part of the grief that can foster moral injury, but it need not come from that. Indeed, it can come from a sense of helplessness in the moment for those who had a task, but their task was not to help, though they wished to. It can come from betrayal as too, especially by those in positions of responsibility. And it can come from the commission of war crimes, whether blatant or by strict legal interpretation. He emphasizes the importance of the chaplain corps or religious counselors outside of the military in providing the religious healing process for the soul. He reminds us of the phrase, sometimes now tart, and which many of you will not fully appreciate now but will come to in time, that you cannot go home. Particularly for those in the military, because the civilian world and the home life from which combat veterans came from is not able to process that transformation, and they cannot adequately engage that person anymore. But he comes to the conclusion, channeling those with whom he has spoken, that the VA itself cannot provide the healing of the moral injury. It must come, and it has to come from the community. We define that as the peers, the neighborhood, the faith congregations, the service organizations, and individuals. And that means just listening. Not to understand fully, but to appreciate, to deepen the respect, to try to understand, and through going through that process to help in some small way in the healing. And he also clarifies, importantly, the importance of seeing moral injury as something different from PTSD. Moral injury, he says on page 8, is a jagged disconnect from our understanding of who we are and what we and others ought to do and ought not to do. Experiences that are common in war, inflicting purposeful violence, witnessing the sudden violent maiming of a loved buddy, the suffering of civilians, challenge and often shatter our understanding of the world as a good place where good things should happen to us, the foundational beliefs that we learn as infants. And he goes on to, then, the next page, to emphasize that moral injury is everywhere. But he sees it as different, more pronounced in war, and especially in Iraq and the Afghanistan conflicts. These wars demanded the intense and prolonged participation of a tiny fraction of our nation's youth in sustained campaigns built on the intentional violation of the ancient sanctions against killing. Those who returned did so without the healing rituals of cleansing and forgiveness practiced by past generations. So a lot in this book to think about, a lot both for reflection looking back and proposals looking forward. My perspective is that as a historian, looking from this to the past, and I have many questions that I will raise when we get into it about what historical thoughts and questions we might raise looking into conflicts in the past from this. But for now, let me turn it to my fellow panelists here to raise some questions that we can start with. I have a whole page of thoughts and questions that I will bring up, but I'm not the purpose that you all are here for. So let me turn it to the rest of you here and ask, and I guess we'll kind of go each of you. We'll start with Erica and work down. But what about the book and its message resonated with you based on your experiences?
I love that the book puts a title to our feelings of moral injury, that it fully explains and gives us a reason for how we feel, a justification for our belief system, and can help us find help or at least some kind of relief in what we're doing, and definitely an explanation to why only a fellow soldier or Marine would understand, or seamen, airmen, so forth.
We'll be inclusive. We can include the Coast Guard too.
Sure.
Okay. Jeremy?
The first time I read this book was really painful. I cried a lot, honestly. It was very illuminating. It put words to things that not just me, but my friends were living with. And the VA just tells you have PTSD. What's wrong with you? Aren't your treatments working? I've shared this book with pretty much all of my friends. I've gotten the response, do I look like I fucking read books to you? A bunch. But the ones who've read it, it's honestly helped, and it's improved mental health of not just myself, but my immediate group of Marine buddies. It's been very beneficial. It's a very frank and honest book. There's a lot of uncomfortable subject matter in it, but there was nothing in this book that I read that popped up like, oh, that's nonsense, that's BS. It was all, I could relate to pretty much everything in it, and it was extremely illuminating.
For me,
Wait a second.
you wrote the book.
I
We know
go?
what you think.
If you want.
Go ahead, Logan.
Go ahead.
So I just, looking out at you guys, you look so young, but you should know that people go into the military within a few months of age of where you all are. And so I hope you can absorb some of the things we're talking about now in this kind of spirit. One is that you could very well find yourself in the position of a lot of people. I'll refrain from calling them kids, but a lot of the young people that I went to war with. So there's that, but there's also, you very shortly will have the responsibility of deciding or helping to decide when this country uses lethal force overseas. When do we send our armed forces to go kill people for some cause? That's part of your responsibility of voting, and so it's really important that you understand what's at stake. When we say, okay, I'll approve the idea of sending Marines or Army or the Air Force or the Navy to some foreign spot to solve some crisis. This is what's at stake. They're real people like y'all who are going to go downrange and get in harm's way. So I ask that you think about these issues that we're talking about this morning in real personal terms.
Good response. Now how am I supposed to follow that? So for me, usually it takes me about 2 to 3 chapters to really get into a book, but the second, I listen to it on Audible for those who don't read books. There's an Audible version. So I listened to the Audible version, and the second I heard the first sentence of the first preface, I was captivated. I just instantly started nodding my head, thinking to myself, now here's a guy who gets it, AKA David Wood. Because everything that Erica and Jeremy said, I felt the same. It felt like my thoughts finally had words to them. When I separated, I felt like I was perfectly fine, and then little things in my life would happen that a little voice would be like, you're not fine, and I'd be like, sure I am. But then when I read this book, like Jeremy, I cried a lot. I could hardly get through one page without crying uncontrollably, and it was kind of like an epiphany, like, why am I so upset? And it was mainly because everything that was written I could feel and think and see, and there wasn't anything that I disagreed with.
Oh, okay. I get to follow all of you. Okay. Now, I've read this book several times now. I think going on 4 or 5, actually. And every time I read it, I pull out something new. I mean, the first time I read it with some anticipation, some nervousness, because I was flipping the pages and I was like, I'm going to find someone I know. I'm going to find a place that I'd been. Everything had resonated with me, and I know Dobbins, we might talk about it a little later, but you knew some of the people in the book?
Yes.
So I was very, very nervous. I mean, but each time I go through it, I pick out different things. Like, I've always been, one of the things I've been angry with the VA that they talk about a little bit in the book is how PTSD is just kind of this umbrella diagnosis. And like, I'll go to my VA therapist, and I'll be like, hey, I'm getting these anger issues about this, or there's something happened that's causing me to do this, and they're like, oh, that's just your PTSD, that's just your PTSD. I'm like, but that doesn't help me, which just increases the anger and whatnot. But having the term moral injury and being able just to use it as a different piece of the puzzle to help figure out this whole crazy transition of coming back to the United States, or to come back to the United States and to the civilian population. It's it's a much bigger ordeal than what I would have ever thought that it was going to be. And this book definitely helped me in that process.
So we don't want to sit here and just praise it. We do want to be critical. What would you criticize about it? And you can offer your own reflection on what you would have done differently too.
Okay, so so in the book, I made a pretty sharp distinction between moral injury and PTSD, because my understanding was and is that PTSD is sort of almost like a mechanical thing that that your body can put you into that flight or fight response where you get all adrenaline floods into your body and you get all hypervigilant and your eyesight, your eyes open wider and you're ready for some crisis, which is great if you're in a car crash or you're in combat or some crisis. But the problem is if your body hijacks you into that kind of bodily response and there's no crisis. And that was my understanding of what PTSD was, as that sort of involuntary triggering of your flight or fight response in a situation where there's no crisis. And and you can see how when that happens and you have no control over it, it can become really disabling. So that was my understanding of PTSD. And then moral injury, I thought of as completely separate, a violation of our sense of what's right. So we all walk around with a sense of what's right. And it's especially highly developed in the military because there are things that are clearly right and things that are clearly wrong. So to go to war is to expose yourself continually to morally jeopardizing situations. So that's great. And so that's all in the book. Since then, I've thought, is that really right? And so one of the characters in the book, not a character, is a real person, Bill Nash, who is a psychiatrist, been in combat, and pretty much the world's expert on PTSD. He said to me the other day, I think we don't know what PTSD is really, but he said, I think it has something to do with identity, which is to say, when you join the military builds you a new personality, and it's very much designed to work in a military environment. And that's great, right? That's why we have such a good military, by the way. But when you get out with your military personality, and it's jarring. It doesn't work in a civilian society. But if you join the military at age 18 or 19, you don't have another personality to go back to, and so that can be really can make that transition back into civilian life very difficult. So I'm starting to think we know less about PTSD and its difference from moral injury than I thought we did. That's probably not much help, but it does explain why the VA is not very much help when it comes to moral injury and PTSD, because they have very rigorous guidelines, and if you have PTSD, you get this. Well, I don't think that works for most people. So anyway, that's my piece on PTSD and moral injury.
So your question was critical of okay. To follow David Wood, I completely agree. I think that the military makes you who you are. For example, I was very neat, and things had to be where they needed to be at all times, and that was because my mother was a complete mess, and then she'd always tell me to go clean it, right? She'd throw all the pots and pans under the sink, and it would just be like, oh my God, and then I'd have to go straighten it up, and then 2 weeks later it'd be this whole mess again. So when I got into the military, it was like, yes, the socks go here, they go here. And that was great for me. So it brought out a whole new OCD, and I loved it, right? Because everybody had to do it. I wasn't crazy. This is how it was. So I think that the military makes you who you are. In the same sense that if you're a good person, it makes you a better good person. I saw that it made drug dealers the best drug dealers, right? Like they now knew how to formulate better schemes and better traffic lines. So that was quite amazing to see also. They do get caught, so don't think that. But I did think that. Now, the first time that I read the book, I was very angry at the book because I thought, I don't have moral injury. I'm fantastic. But I was also in a state of denial. Some denial, maybe. The second time I read the book, or I would read a chapter, be like, this is bullshit, and...
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
Sure. And I'd go back and I'd get a better understanding of what that, because I know what that feeling is. But as it turns out, that when I was a child, I went through a lot of traumatic things, and I would just lock that away. Done, file cabinet in the back of my head, locked, dark area, gray matter. I'm through with it, right? Still some things I can't touch, won't touch. You can't tell me it happened to me. It did, but I wasn't there. So some of those things are like that for me, and I definitely have a lot of that fight or flight in my life while I was there, right? If it's you or me, I pick me and we done. Well, you're done. And that's that. So I was very critical of the book and still have some ideas about it, but that's because of who I am. But I am more on board with the idea of moral injury. I talk to vets for a living now, and I know where they're coming from and have an understanding of moral injury and know in my soul that it is real. And I have it too. I just have to come to terms with where I am with it. Okay.
Well, I can only really speak about myself and some of my closest brothers. And I think that the book talks a lot about PTSD and moral injury, obviously. I think the PTSD is really tied to moral injury. I don't know anybody that has PTSD symptoms that doesn't also have some really deep moral injuries. Even like she was saying, sometimes people don't recognize that it happened, but there's always, I feel like there's always that. I know you mentioned childhood trauma. With me too, I had some childhood traumas. This book sent me on a path of introspection for the past year that has been really, like I said, illuminating to myself, trying to, no matter where I go, there I am type thing. One of my first memories, I'll just say, my mom was mauled by a dog when I was in 3rd grade, and I remember she was the first person I ever saw covered in blood. It ripped her lips off, and I remember her holding her mouth and screaming, "Go away, don't look at me, get out of here, your dad's coming." And that was probably a big, and then September 11th happened. I think, that set me on the path of becoming a Marine, because in my mind I was like, I want to be able to take care of myself and not, it set me on the path of becoming who I am today. And this book, I don't really think it's a criticism. I don't mean to just sit here and praise it, but it got me on the road of introspection that I wasn't ever on before, and I hadn't identified things. The book talks about childhood traumas with the one psychologist, the touchy-feely tough guy. And reading that chapter is what was like, I could relate to that, and it surprised me because I'd pushed that out of my mind until I read this book. And I think that there's a much closer relationship between PTSD and moral injury than the medical community says.
David. I'm just throwing you out there.
Cool. All right. No, you guys have brought up some great things, and David, I'm really glad that you brought up the the concept of identity when we come back, because right now you guys are all forming your identity, but if you go into the military, you have to change that identity. You have to create a whole new version. You get taught the Army values, you get taught the Marine Corps code, Air Force and Navy, I'm sure, have other ethics, things that get brought up. But when we come back, there's such a shift because you're no longer because you normally come back to where your home, wherever home was for you, you normally go back there, but you can't really go back, and then you're going to be different when you come back. And then you got this whole time that you got to kind of create a new identity for yourself. And I think that is really the time when vets think about moral injury, or if it comes up, that's that time when we come back and we have the reflection of what we did. Because I don't know about for the rest of you, but what I know when I was there, everything was just go, 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 and I was so, what's the word where you have to put your thoughts off for a while and think about them later?
Compartmentalizing.
Compartmentalizing, yes. But when you get home, you actually get time to go through those things. And in your book, you talk about how community is one of the best ways to combat moral injuries. And I agree with you, especially with my my little veteran communities within the Veteran Military Center. I also joined the Combat Vets Motorcycle Association. I'm involved in some other veteran groups. But one of the biggest things, and a question I wanted to ask you, which I felt you answered the question in the book, which I like. I'm glad that you didn't just say, here's moral injury, this is what it is, you guys got to figure it out. I'm glad that you brought up that community was an important part along with it. And but I do want to ask you, what do you think is the best way for specifically OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, and OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom? What do you think the best way for them to create a sense of community is? Because they're really not going to the VFWs or the AMVETs or the American Legions who past generations of veterans have already established. Well, what do you think would be the best way to get OEF, OIF vets together to talk about these things?
So I'm not an expert on this, and I can only look at some things that other people have tried, and they seem to work. So there's a number of veterans groups that are formed around the idea of continued service. So there's like Team Rubicon, which is mostly veterans, or completely veterans, I guess. And they, they just dispatched a whole bunch of teams to the Bahamas. They do disaster relief. And, because they're former military people, they know how to do that. They know how to get organized. They know how to task organize and do that kind of thing. So that's great. There are other groups that are formed around athletics. So in Washington, D.C., I ran with a group of veterans, and it was just about running. So I don't know how you create community. That's a kind of a difficult question beyond my expertise, but it seems to me that that groups of like interests, like disaster relief or sports, or around existing institutions like universities, churches, synagogues, mosques, are the natural way for people to find their own communities. So that's not a terrific answer, but I think that's the way I've seen it work. Yeah.
So
and I'm sorry, I just thought of something else, and that is there are a couple of organizations that are in the business of connecting groups of veterans. And I'm sorry, I can't think of their names offhand, but I can get them for you. But they're like, okay, if you live in Cincinnati, there are X number of veterans groups that you can join, and we can hook you up with them. And I think they have a map where you just put your cursor on a map and click, and they, up pops a whole number of veterans groups that can do exactly what you're talking about. So there's that.
Am I good now?
You're good now.
Honestly, I think my biggest criticism is this book needs a disclaimer. Like before you even start it, it needs to be like, if you're a veteran and you're reading this book, you may start to feel some stuff that you're not ready for. Because this book completely blindsided me. Like the rest of my panelists, we all read this book a year ago and did this panel with David Wood. And it kind of opened Pandora's box for me, and I was not expecting it. I started reading this book, and then I dived in head first, and I was, telling my husband and kids, like, leave me alone, I gotta finish this book, just get away from me. And it was mainly because I was sorting through some stuff, that little voice that kept saying, there's some stuff going on, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And it kind of brought everything to the surface for me, and I wasn't expecting that. So it completely blindsided me. That'll teach me to say yes without doing my homework.
So what you're saying is you should have judged this book by its cover.
I should have, yeah. I was like, oh, military book, I have no issues. It won't resonate with me at all. But it's because like Erica, I didn't think I had any issues. I didn't think I had moral injury. I didn't think I had PTSD. I thought I was fine. I'm Army strong. Like, I'm good. And I had kids and a family, and I didn't have the issues that were stated in the book. I didn't struggle with addiction. I didn't struggle to succeed in society. If anything, when I got out, I came out of the military, hit the ground running. I got enrolled in college. I started a family. I was very successful transitioning. And so I thought I was perfectly fine and immune to anything that the military inflicted on me. But boy, was I wrong, thanks to you. And again, the childhood issues resurface because a lot of people that diagnose PTSD say that childhood trauma can sometimes be an indicator, which you touched on in the book a little bit, that it can sometimes be an indicator as a previous condition, and it kind of gets sparked. I can kind of see how that works, or how you can be more vulnerable to PTSD if you have childhood trauma. And like Erica, I've always thought I was immune to emotions because I would just take anything that happened to me and suck it up and hold it in, and I was fine. And that's why when I started reading this book, I couldn't stop crying, and I couldn't control it at that point. Before, I'd always been able to control it. And the book kind of forced me to let it out, and I'm still sifting through that myself and what that means. So yeah, definitely a disclaimer next time would be nice. And I think maybe describing the lesser versions of PTSD and moral injury. Whenever we think of PTSD, you think of the veteran losing it at a parade because fireworks are going off and he's drawing his gun and flipping out on people. And that's the illusion we create. But I think if we start to paint the lesser picture of the functioning veterans, like the ones on this panel that are actually successful, and we're pretty proficient in what we do because that's what the military trained us to do, but we're also have that internal suffering. I think it would resonate with society a little bit more that you don't have to be totally effed up to have PTSD or moral injury. And that's kind of my biggest issue with the military in general, or in society and everything encompassed in that, is that we belittle everything. If it's not at a grand scale, it doesn't exist. If you're not losing your mind, or if you're not a homeless veteran, then you don't really have PTSD, or you don't really have moral injury, or it's not that severe, or we don't know how to help you now because it's down here and you're high functioning, so you should be fine. Even though you're, have nightmares and you do this and that, you still have your issues, but it's not at a grander scheme. So I think if we just spoke on that more, we could normalize that and kind of break the stereotype a little bit more.
So do you think it's, so do you regret having read the book? Because you were fine before you read it. Now.
Yes and no, and I struggle with that. And I read it for like Dave over here, this is my 4th time reading it. And now, since the first time I read it, as soon as I see it and hear it, I get anxiety. As soon as I think about it, like all this week, I've been freaking out a little bit because I've been reading it again and listening to it, and I'm not in the place I was a year ago. So I feel like maybe I would have been fine and I could have kept on had I not read this. But in retrospect, like what you talk about, getting help sooner rather than later can make all the difference, because who knows, maybe 10 years from now something else trigger it, and then now I just, I can't handle it, or I'm in a bad place in my life and I get really low and maybe, I contemplate suicide or something like that. But I think I'm at a somewhat healthy state in my life, so the book came at a decent time to where I could reconcile what I've done and what I've been through at a healthy rate versus later had I waited. So yes and no. I hate how uncomfortable I've been since I've read the book and the issues I've jumped through and the therapy I've jumped into. I hate it, and the inner army in me wants to reject all of that and be like, I'm good. But I know that I can't. And your book keeps reminding me of that.
So let me turn us to one of the questions that comes up about thinking ahead and forward and reflecting as well on what we don't perhaps do as well as we could. You make a point in the book repeatedly of the significance of ritual, that we don't really have rituals. When World War II veterans were coming back, when the combat forces are coming back, they experienced a decompression opportunity on the ships. It simply took a long time to come back, and they had a chance to work out a lot. The U.S. military has moved towards that, trying to keep soldiers together for a period of time after they rotate back to try to bring them down together as a group instead of releasing them all the way that it had occurred during the Vietnam War with all of the problems that had come from that. What is missing, do you think, in the absence of rituals, the absence of group ritual in our society, in the ways that we do this either within and with the military or beyond that? What is missing by us not really having a ritual for bringing our soldiers back and processing them through in some kind of ritual to return them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And so the military has tackled the problem of how to transition its people from military into the civilian world. The problem is that their process doesn't involve any civilians, which is kind of weird, you know? One of the interesting things I found out when I was reporting on this book was in previous societies, there was a whole community that took part in rituals in which they welcomed their veterans back, and if they felt that there was something to forgive, to go through rituals of forgiveness. So for much of history, killing someone in combat was considered a sin, a religious sin, and it was something for which you had to atone and be forgiven for, which is kind of an interesting concept. And there's always been this debate about killing in war. Is it murder or is it righteous killing? And nobody's obviously come to an answer on that one. But the thing that struck me was that there were these society-wide rituals of return and cleansing because war was considered dirty. And I think we can think of it in that way, in the sense that when you go to war, you could do things that are not acceptable in civilian society. Like in the book, there's a story of a Marine who shot a child dead, which was the kind of, I mean, it was not just acceptable in wartime, that's what you were supposed to do. It was the highest value of protecting his fellow Marines and vanquishing the enemy. But in civilian society, killing a child, it's about the worst thing you could do. So ancient societies had these rituals of cleansing, that whatever happened in war, we forgive you for. Whatever you had to do, we're okay with that, welcome back. And it was a very formal ritual. So we don't have anything like that. You know, when veterans come back and they feel like they need some help, some cleansing, some whatever, we say, well, go to the VA. That's why we have a VA. Not our problem, right? It's not our problem, and we wouldn't know what to do. So there's this huge gulf of that face veterans when they come home, where there's really, what do you do? That's part of it. And then the other part of it is it happens so fast. You know, I've been on a combat patrol in Afghanistan, a night combat patrol, and then flown back to the United States the very same day, which is kind of astonishing. And you don't have time to process all the stuff that's been going on. And so a lot of veterans arrive a lot of military people arrived back in the United States having had no time to think about what happened, and all of a sudden they're cast out into civilian society, which most of us have no clue as to what they did, what it was like, and what went on. And so that's why it can be so disorienting. But we don't have those kind of rituals anymore, and I think that's a problem.
Do any of the four of you have rituals that you've found or that you've participated in? Is motorcycle riding a ritual in a way?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it goes back to that community and dealing with moral injury through community. I got lucky and I found a combat vets motorcycle group, and I actually just did a 1,300-mile ride to Sturgis here last month. And that for me was a very spiritual. I did with a bunch of other combat veterans. What I have definitely found, and this kind of goes back to isolation, which David, you also talk about in your book a little bit. I've kind of found myself putting myself in situations to where I don't really interact too much with civilians. I do feel like there is kind of this veteran-civilian divide. And I have nothing against you all or anything. It's just, it's where I feel more comfortable being around people that I know that have been through similar situations, similar actions. I'm involved with the Veteran Voices Project, which Erica over here is the coordinator of, and I'm sure she'll bring it up later on. But I mean, even that has been a ritual. Like, I've gotten to sit down with past generation of veterans and just sit down and talk to them and hear their story, let them hear a little bit of my story. And it's just, it definitely is something missing with the ritual, and there's definitely been other authors that have talked upon it, such as Carl Malantes and his book, What It's Like to Go to War. It is definitely something that I feel is missing, but I don't know if that's necessarily something that the veterans are going to have to create that ritual, or if it's something that we're going to have to talk with civilians. I think that would be the best way, because killing is a very taboo thing. And when you come back, no matter, I mean, I found it hard to return back into religious organizations because of it. I felt that I would be judged by it too negatively just because, you know, thou shalt not kill. That's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward, black and white, but nothing in this world is black and white. And as you guys grow, you'll see more, and you'll probably see more than what we even saw, because there's just so much more happening in the world now.
So I guess that's just natural that I follow. So I think my ritual, it seems like now, is like forcing my story down people's throat, like being here today. But being a part of anything military related when I got out, and I think that's what helped me transition is when I got out of the military, I got out at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I moved back up here. I'm from Ohio, but I had no military connections. I didn't know anyone in the military here. I didn't know where the Dayton VA was. I didn't know anything about military life here. And that really scared me, because I'm like, I'm not on base. I can't just go on base. What do you mean? You know, and it was just very scary. And so when I started college, I started at Sinclair Community College. And the first thing I did is go into their Veterans Center and be like, what's up? What can you guys do? Like, what do you guys do here? Let's talk about it. And they were very small at the time, and so I asked them if I could apply for a job as a work study there. And so I worked there for about 2 years, and just talking to veterans and helping them transition and sharing my experiences with them, like, this is what you do. And I'm walking them through how to start college and how to manage it, and almost mentoring them, because I had just done it myself, was very therapeutic for me. And then after I graduated Sinclair, I came to Wright State, and I again found the Veteran and Military Center at Wright State and was like, what's up? What do you guys do? And they were, obviously it's a larger campus than Wright State, so they were very different. There was a lot of military culture there, and a lot of people hanging out and talking about their experiences. And I had the similar job. I was helping veterans start college and do everything they needed to do. And that was very therapeutics, and it almost became my ritual. And I kind of continue to do that now, as I find myself trying to reach out to veterans and be like, look, I've been there, let me show you how it's done. And so I've labeled myself the gray area expert because all the things that the VA or whoever is giving you your stipends or whatever doesn't want to tell you, I've navigated those channels, and so I've done the research, I've investigated it, I've reached out to who I need to connect with to get the correct answers, and then I relay that information to other veterans. So I just keep myself surrounded by veterans and helping them and excluding the community.
My work with the Veterans Voices Project, I got to interview people I really admired and guys that I was like, I'd like to live a life like, I want to be like you when I'm older. I don't want to be how I'm becoming. And I realized that doing that, a lot of people suffer in silence, even the really successful people that we would consider successful veterans, they just suffer in silence, but those storms are still going on inside of themselves, and they still are wrestling with the moral conundrums from their youth. You mentioned Dachau. One of the men I interviewed and did a radio piece on, he was a part of the unit that liberated Dachau, and I did not know everything that had happened there before I interviewed him, and I didn't know about it until after I read your book, and he's since passed, but I wish I could have spoke to him because he's someone I admire greatly. And I remember he talked to me about love and forgiveness, and the only people he didn't forgive were the SS, and I didn't understand why at the time. And like I said, your book was very illuminating to me. The other point is the infantry is full of rituals. I had a ritual where I'd smoke a cigarette and listen to a certain song before I'd go on patrol. When I'd get back, I'd smoke another cigarette and listen to that same song, and I did that every single patrol for God knows how many times. Those rituals become habits, and a lot of the rituals in the infantry aren't healthy rituals. They're extremely unhealthy, and they're destructive to not just your body, but your interpersonal relationships and your psyche in the long term. And I think that the importance of rituals really, those rituals exist, they just aren't the right rituals, I think.
I got through my military career being a diesel mechanic, and I didn't cuss. Like, that was very difficult because people would edge me on. But I had a goal. I didn't start cussing until well after, actually. But when I got home and afterwards, I did not have a job with civilians. I couldn't handle it. So every job that I had, I only worked with military or military people. I tried to go to Sinclair and I failed miserably because they didn't have a veteran center at the time where you could go in and hang out. So I stopped going there, but the thing that got me through was cooking at rather mass levels, right? So my mother was a cook, my grandmother was a cook. My mother cooked at juvenile hall, so she made mass amounts of food. My grandmother did it for the church and congregations and stuff. So I would just like cook, and then I'd like walk around and be like, want a cupcake? Here you go. Like just show up to the office or wherever with like all these new recipes I had tried or whatever. So I just used cooking as a way to release, and that was kind of my ritual. Still do.
And a lot of you in the audience have gone through rituals in different ways. If you think about those of you who've gone through bar and bas mitzvahs, those of you who are in scouts may have participated in the Order of the Arrow ritual. There are lots of these different things that are out there. But in some ways we've turned our backs as a society on those sorts of rituals. And as a historian, I'm curious, and this is not really a question for you, but a question to kind of pose to other historians and to all of us. What rituals did we once use that we have forgotten about, that by forgetting about them, we've done ourselves some harm that we didn't know that we've done? What power is there in ritual? We see it in the book. What rituals might we look back and think about and seek to perhaps revive or reconsider and bring back to the fore again? Graduation is a pretty big deal, but it's not really that powerful of a ritual anymore, however much some of you are really looking forward to graduation and getting out of here. All right. We've got time really for one last serious question that I want to throw out. And I think we'll start with Logan so that Logan gets to go first instead of playing catch up. Some in this audience are likely considering service in the armed forces after they graduate or leave. Based on your experience and the issues raised in the book, what message might you have for them?
I would have preferred to go last. No.
Okay, fine. Jeremy, you're up.
Okay. I would say, I enlisted my senior year of high school, and I knew exactly what I was doing as soon as I graduated, and I had absolutely no doubt. I thought I was going to make a career of it. I was positive of it. I was in great physical shape. I could shoot. I was decently smart. I didn't have to try in school to get to pass. At least I could slack off, not do homework, cut class sometimes. I didn't really care about school because, I'm going in the Marine Corps. Who needs that? I would say that to really think about the person you want to become and the person that the decision you're going to make. You're about to enter into a world where you're making decisions that are going to affect the entire trajectory of your life. You don't even realize it. But if you shoot wrong now, you're going to land in a place you might not want to be at all in 10 years. And to really be cognizant of that the choices you're making today are going to have lasting impacts on you 10, 15, 20 years from now. And someday, most of you will probably have kids, and your choices are going to affect them too, not just yourself, but also if you have a family. The thought of how I was affecting my mother did not cross my mind. And the things that I put her through, my father recently told me that when I was over there, he was terrified that he was going to lose me and my mom because she was going crazy. And I honestly didn't even consider how I was affecting the people that cared about me the most. So I'd encourage you to make an informed decision, because you only make one decision in the Marine Corps, and that's to go show up on the yellow footprints. After that, everything else is predetermined. You can try to affect it, but you're in the river. You're just going.
Dave?
No, okay, I'll go next. As far as what advice I would give, when I was your age, I was not thinking I was going to go in the military. I could actually track back my lineage to, I had a male fight in every war all the way back to the Revolutionary War in my family. And I thought I was going to be the first one to break that. Some things happened in life that kind of changed my mind. I went to go work for a factory after partying too hard my first time in college. And then after doing the factory life, I was like, all right, I'll give the military a shot. And that seems a little bit better than just grinding away an assembly line. And when I got in, I was pretty opinionated when I was your age. I mean, I'm probably still am now, but hopefully I can recognize it to a better degree. But when I was in, I had all these ideas on like why we were over there and what we were really doing and what I wanted to get out of it. But what I really found was it just wasn't about me. I mean, people talk about being in the military and doing something that's bigger than yourself, and that's really what it is. When I was over in Afghanistan, I didn't care about me getting shot. I didn't care about me not making it back. I had already accepted the fact that I wasn't coming home. What I cared about was the guys to my left and to my right, and the gals too, making sure that they got home safe, and because I got to meet them, I got to meet their families. I mean, it stopped becoming about me and just started becoming about them. And if you guys were thinking about any career in the military, I mean, that's definitely the attitude that I would say that you're gonna adopt it regardless either way. The military has a way of getting you there, but I mean, and then even if you don't decide to go in the military and your family and your work, I mean, if you want to be part of something bigger than yourself, I mean, you can't be thinking about yourself.
Okay, I'm ready now. So when I was in high school, I very much had like the Vietnam conscientious objector idea, like, you can't tell me nothing. I'm not going. I think wars are stupid. Heck no. However, I had horrible counselors. No one told me that when I was a junior I should be applying to colleges, I should be writing up scholarship information. So when I was a senior and I got out, I had Headley scholarships. I had one for $500. I had no idea what FAFSA was. I qualified for all of this stuff, but I did not sign up for any of it. I had no idea. I had a job at the American Red Cross teaching, but it wasn't really enough to get by. But I'm 18 and I got to move out. So I was like, there was this guy showed up. He said, travel and college. I need to travel and college. So I went down to the recruiting station. No one in my family had ever joined the military before. And again, you can't tell me nothing. So I joined, and it was the best decision I have ever made. I would do it again. No regrets. I volunteered for my tour in Iraq because I couldn't bear the thought of them bringing war to us, right? I didn't want, war is horrible. What they do to civilians and the land and all of that, y'all don't want that, I promise. And somebody's got to step up, like Barry said, and make sure that it's not coming here. So, yeah, it gives great opportunities for you to progress in your life with school, with, are they still handing out bonuses?
I think so.
Okay. Sign-on bonuses, you're in the best shape of your life. You can take advantage. In the Army, you can make those decisions of where you want to go, what you want to do before you join, and then decide like, oh, I want to be at this base. I want to be closer to home. I want to be far away as possible from Ohio, so forth and so on. So I'm for it.
David? A thought? Because we're making Logan go last.
So I've watched a lot of people your age get into the military, and I think for a lot of young people, it's a really great deal. We were talking earlier about the military's sort of relentless drive to make you a leader. So even in basic training or boot camp, they designate somebody as a leader. You got to step up and take those responsibilities. And then at every level after that, you're really pushed to get a promotion, to take on more leadership responsibilities. And so by the time you get out, even after 4 years, you've done some pretty good, creative, hard learning about leadership. And for a lot of people, that's great stuff, and it's something that for a lot of people wouldn't ordinarily have that opportunity. So it can be a real maturing process in the best kind of ways. Other people don't adapt, and it's not, it doesn't work for them. So, it's hard to make a broad brush kind of judgment about whether people ought to join the military or not. I mean, my my basic concept of the military is it exists to threaten to kill people and to kill people if necessary. And, if that's something you absolutely can't put up with, then you should make a decision based on that. But the other thing is that jobs in the military almost always don't involve killing. So it's hard, and I guess you ought to do a lot of research before you make a decision and think about yourself and what you need. A lot of people join and really revel in the kind of structure and direction that the military organization exists on. Other people find that oppressive. So I guess do your homework and figure out what it is that you want to fill your life with for the next few years.
Oh, if I could add, the Air Force only pushes buttons, so you could always join that branch.
So clearly we can all agree, from what I'm hearing, is to make an informed decision. When I joined, I was at rock bottom in my life. I was a teen mom in high school. I don't recommend that. It's not like the show. And so I had to give up custody of my son, and I was 21 when I had joined. I just turned 21 September 17th, and I joined September 23rd. Happy birthday. So when I joined, I was at rock bottom. My son was living in daycare because I was trying to balance, going to college and working full time. And I mean, he was in daycare 12 to 15 hours a day. And I'm like, what kind of life is this for my baby and for me? And I was doing everything everyone said, go to school, go to work. And I come from a very low income family. And it doesn't work like that when you come from a low income family. You can't just dig yourself out. It's not that easy. So I was doing everything everyone told me. I was working, I was going to school, and that's all it was. And I was getting nowhere. And I was, borderline homeless and everything, and I'm like, this is getting ridiculous, screw it, I'm joining the military. And I joined thinking I have nothing to lose. No one can talk me out of it because I have nothing to lose. I gave custody of my son to his grandmother, and he was in great hands, so I'm like, if something happens to me, he's in better hands than what I'm doing, so I literally have nothing to lose. And that's kind of a rough mentality going in with, looking back now, because as this book taught me, I didn't really realize what that entailed. And Erica, I thrived in that environment, the structure, the camaraderie. The military made me who I am today, and so I don't regret it. And I would encourage people to join. I have 2 sons, or 3 sons actually, and people always ask, would you let them join? And I'm like, that's their decision, but I want them to make an informed decision based on what's right for them. If you want to join and serve your country, all power to you, but know the research, read books like these, read war memoirs, read about the conflict, read about the people you're going to war with, read about, the Islamic States or whoever we're at war with at the time, but know a well-rounded, informed decision. If you talk to your parents and they're like, absolutely not, find out why. Say, well, why? To give me, good reason why you don't want me to join, but make a very informed decision, because like Dave said, it's no longer about you once you enlist, whether you want it to be or not. It's not just to pay for school. It's not just a job. It's not just to go kill people and kick in doors like the recruiters show you and like all the commercials show you. And it's not like a video game. It's not fun. It's not rewarding to do that to people, and to see that people in that state, to see a war-torn country is it's a culture shock. It's not like what you think. It's not like the movies. So you need to consider all of this before you consider taking that oath, and now you're responsible for Dave, Erica, and Jeremy and I. Like, you're responsible for them. It's up to you. And if you're 18 years old and you can live with the decisions you make affecting somebody else, then more power to you. But that's something to consider.
All right, well, we've gone through more than an hour of discussion about the book. Again, there'll be a quiz later, so if you've not read it, you need to read it tonight. We would like to bring the lights up a little. We've got 2 microphones that will be moving around, and we'll be able to take some questions from you guys in the audience.
I think we'll start with a question from the Miami Valley School, who's in attendance today. Anybody from the Miami Valley School have a question for someone on our panel? Anyone? Here we go. Here's a question.
I only ask that you keep your question tight. I only ask that you keep your question tight and focused to the point. No essays.
So we learned that Logan and Erica both struggled with the idea of moral injury and their PTSD. Did any of you else, Dave and Jeremy, did you guys also have a similar struggle path, or was the process to realizing that you guys were struggling a lot different?
I'll go first. So when I first came back, the military made me very resilient, very much like I'm tough, I can get through things, there's nothing wrong with me. I get back and I'm only back a few days and I'm already getting in trouble with my friends. Well, I'm not really getting in trouble with my friends, but when I was in Germany, I developed a very bad drinking habit, and that's one of the places I was stationed. And when I came back, I tried to continue that drinking when I was here, but in the first week, friends were getting DUIs, getting into bar fights. My mother comes up to me and tells me I'm broken. I try to show my dad a documentary about my unit, and he breaks down crying while he's extremely drunk. So there was kind of a combination. I mean, I was in bed one night with someone, and they were worried about me hitting them in my sleep. So I had certain situations come up in my life that kind of told me, like, whoa, something's a problem here. Something's wrong. that and my family kind of forced me to go to the VA and get help. I wouldn't have gone on my own volition. So yeah, there were definitely a lot of things that I have PTSD. It's one of the things the VA has diagnosed me with. I definitely would say I have a moral injury. Realizing it came in different steps than what Erica and Logan described, and I'm sure what Jeremy will describe as well. But I mean, I think we all have gotten to the same point in taking different paths.
Yeah, my wife saved my life. I was a hot mess when I came home. I isolated myself from everyone. I drank myself to oblivion. I was a hot mess, and I didn't realize I was a hot mess either, because like I said, there are rituals in the infantry, but they're not healthy rituals, and they all involve liquor. And I was a drunk, and I was going down a path where I was isolating my wife and my family from me. I was being an asshole to everyone I knew. I was not a pleasant person to be around. And I'm extremely fortunate that I had someone that loved me through all that and stayed with me even when I started opening up and sharing some of my soul with her. Because I thought I was unlovable. I was like, the things that I'd done made me I was like, I should go to prison. I deserve to die. And I was suicidal. And yeah, I was in a really bad way for a long time. It's been almost a 10-year, since 2012 for me to get to this point. It's been a continual process, and she saved my life. Like I said, she's the one that got me on the path of self-improvement, to be like, you need to go to school and you need to use these benefits that you have. Like, don't fuck yourself up. Like, you made it through this stuff. And my wife is a pretty religious lady, and she's like, God kept you alive and kept you whole through all this. Like, you have this opportunity, and we're still not very old. Like, don't write yourself off yet. And her believing in me is the thing that helped me get back on a path to normalcy.
Take another question over here.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Claudia Mason. I served 20 years in the Army. I'm retired now and in charge of an Army JROTC program with Dayton Public Schools. I want to thank the panelists here for their honesty and their perspective. But my question is to the author, Mr. Wood. What role does the average U.S. citizen have in defining the kind of military we have? We live in one of the richest countries in the world, and many of our citizens are not exercising their right to vote. And I think the U.S. citizens have a big role in the kind of leaders that we have. I think we don't bring that up enough, because it's a civilian that leads our military. Thank you.
I would like to see more people. I think a lot of us assume that the military knows what it's doing, that our civilian leaders who command the military know what they're doing, and that they know more than we do, and therefore we shouldn't get involved. Bad idea, because I've spent a lot of time at the pinnacles, as an observer at the pinnacles of power in Washington, D.C., and I can assure you that there's this idea that they know more than we do, not true. So I would like to see more people accost their congressional representatives and make your views known, and ask hard questions, and demand good answers. If you have strong feelings about the war in Afghanistan, when was the last time you stood up at a meeting with your local representatives and talked about, what you think ought to be done there? My sense is that in Washington, they almost never hear from any of you out here in the country. And so they're just going along on autopilot, and that's not okay, because it's lives of the people up here that they're dealing with. So, I think there's an enormous opportunity to get more involved and to make your views known. And then, of course, you got to do a little homework. So it's not enough just to have strong views about something. They've got to be grounded in facts. And so do some reading and get politically involved. The country was organized to make it easy for you to do that. So make use of it. Does that answer your question?
We have time for a couple more questions. We have a question. I see someone over here.
Okay, while we're speaking about politics, how has serving changed your political beliefs and general perspective on life?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear it.
Yes, sorry. How has serving changed your political beliefs and/or general perspective on life?
In 50 words or less.
Cynical. It made me a lot more cynical. It also made me hold my elected officials and even police officers to a higher accountability and to a higher standard. One that I don't see always being met, but in each job you have good people and bad people. But it definitely, it changed my viewpoint. It definitely shook me into this. Before the military, I thought I knew what safety was. I thought, being here in this country, that had the military, I had a police force, I had people out there looking out for me, looking out for my best interest. Coming back from the military, that all changed and got wiped. Do I believe they're all out for my best interest now? Maybe not. It definitely made me have to look at things a little bit more. I mean, looking at some political debates and whatnot just makes me angry because it feels like it's becoming an insult to my intelligence because I've already given up. I've already put my life on the line to sacrifice for what this country is. It definitely makes me really upset when I see policies being abused or this country just not being ran to a standard that I was held to, that I would expect that they get held to as well.
So I agree with Dave. I feel all of those things as well. I take politics a lot more serious than I ever did. I never was raised to vote or know anything about politics. And since the military, I take voting very seriously and I take politics very seriously. And the people who make those decisions, I have a lot of internal beef with because I think they need to be making more informed decisions. So I feel almost personally responsible to do what David Wood said and get my voice out there and have people that are making these decisions on our lives and war and all of that, give them more of a informed decision on what you're doing to people. Like, you can't just send us to war and be like, we'll deal with the repercussions later. So I take voting very seriously.
It made me a very moderate person. Anytime I hear anybody going extreme on either end of the political spectrum, it makes my toes curl because it reminds me of Taliban speak or Al-Qaeda speak, the dehumanization language and stuff. It just frightens me because one thing I learned in the Marine Corps is how fragile civilization is. People think that, these things that we have, these liberties we take for granted are just here and they've been here for generations, so they'll always be here, but it could unravel in less than a generation. And you can see that throughout the world right now. So I'm a much more moderate person because I've realized how fragile the safety and the peace that we take for granted really is. It's very easy to lose. And once the genie's out of the bottle, the genie doesn't want to go back in the bottle.
So two things. I vote at every kind of election, right? It's like, oh, vote on Prop 2. I'm voting. And then I vote in all major elections. And then I donate to the causes that I see fit, right? So there's that. But then on the other side of the politics, as Dave mentioned, the police officers and stuff, it is very frustrating to be an African American woman and have to put my hands on the steering wheel and be afraid at what might happen to me in that kind of situation in everyday life, knowing that I fought for your right, that I've protected this country, so forth and so on. So it's a tricky balance.
Here.
Yeah. So a lot of the panel has talked of relating to the book personally. So do you think it brings more comfort, or does it bring more concern and awareness to what you are dealing with?
It provided comfort in that I kept thinking I was fine, but little things would happen to me, like I had a panic attack in a psychology class because something relevant came out about a convoy or the war or something, and so I started just talking about my convoy just naturally, and I started to have a panic attack, and it was really embarrassing. And so little things would start to happen to me that I couldn't control, and it would kind of freak me out that I didn't have control of what kept happening to me. I pulled a gun on my mom once because she came over to my house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, the fuck are you doing here? Excuse my French. And so I was, ready to kill her because she was an intruder. So little things kept happening like that. Since I've been out 8 years roughly now, and from when I got out till now, there's been little things that continually to happen in the past 8 years. And I have 2 small children now. They're 4 and 2. And it was very difficult for me to adjust being a mother because of the military and because of my moral injury, and looking at children like these sweet, innocent, cute things like everyone else. I'm like, get that thing away from me. And so it was comforting to know that I'm not just like a pariah, that I'm some psycho that hates kids, because a lot of people would, react weird to me for my reactions, including my family, and they judged me harshly. They were like, you're, soulless, you're emotionless, you're not the same since the military, and they pointed it out, but I'm just like, no, I'm tough now, you don't understand, you weren't in the military. So the book really helped me put some clarity to those things, but it's really uncomfortable. Like, now that I recognize those things and the things that I went through, it's really uncomfortable to manage, but I'm thankful that I'm managing them now, because like I said, it's been 8 years, so who knows what another 10 years would do to me. So it's comforting.
I would say nothing about this book or even doing these panels. We're going to be doing another one later on, and we've already done me, Logan, and Erica. This is Jeremy's first one, but we've done quite a few already. It's not easy for us. And everything about this is very personal. We're up here telling you guys some of our most intimate, time periods of our lives, but I feel like it has to be done, because if we don't talk about it, you guys don't know. And also, if I don't talk about it, that doesn't give me time to reflect on it and to go over it. I often think about my grandpa, who served in the Korean War. He was there towards the end of it. He didn't see a lot of combat, but he saw little combat, and on his deathbed he shared a little bit of it with me. And when he did, I knew that here was a man who I loved, but you could tell throughout his entire life he had a big elephant on his chest, a big secret, a big burden, and you could tell that it affected every relationship that man ever had. And even though I loved him very much, I knew that that's not what I wanted to have happen for me in my life. So even though I might be emotionally drained after doing this, it's still very important to me. So it is very personal, and it's not comfortable at all, but it is important.
I'm going to actually interrupt here and give David just the last word, because I know we are looking at 11 o'clock and thinking about the logistics here. But David, the last word, if you want.
So one of the things that has been the most interesting to me, and really a joy of having done the reporting and writing this book, is to meet folks like these veterans here, and I just feel so honored to have shared some of their stories, and you should feel the same way. Like David said, these are painful, very personal reflections that they're sharing with you, but they're so important. So I'm glad that we've done this session just to get a little tiny bit of an insight into what these folks go through. And so I think you owe these folks a big round of applause for what they've done and what they're doing.
And also, thank you to our moderator, Jonathan Winkler, and of course to author David Wood. Let's show them a round of applause as well.